We're going to talk about testing for the next 25 minutes. And first of all, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And my next slide depends on your answer, so answer carefully. How many of you think tests are useful? I guess everyone, fair enough. But how many of you write tests? A little bit less. How many of you think that they have the right amount of tests in their current project, in their current application? Fantastic. This always works. This is the pattern that I always see when I ask these questions. And actually, there is a gap between people that think tests are useful and people that actually write tests. And this talk is about finding the reason why there is this gap and see if there are some solutions. And there are. Dmitry Abramov is a Facebook engineer as well as one of the maintainers of Just, and he said this thing I hear from engineers: we aren't writing tests right now because we are focusing on building features. And actually, I'm not saying like you should write tests, you shouldn't. I don't want to enter that discussion. But if people think that tests are slowing them down when they are building features, then there is a problem because tests should make us faster. And the reason might be that testing is pretty hard. And these are the reasons why I think it is hard. It's time consuming. If you write proper tests, then you end up spending more time writing tests than the time you spend writing code, which is not bad in principle, but developers feel less productive if they don't push code to production. Therefore, they're going to write less tests. Tests are complex to set up. So for example, if you use a Webpack to bundle your application and you load any non-JavaScript module, then making the same code base work on Node for testing is not easy. For example, if you load the CSS with the CSS loader, Node is going to complain. Tests gives you a lot of false negatives. So if you ever wrote an end-to-end test, you know what I mean. Sometimes you have your code working in the browser and you cannot have a test working in your test environment, because the HTTP request fails, or you try to access DOM properties that are not in the DOM yet. And this is you waste a lot of time. This is pretty frustrating for developers. If we all agree, we can call it testing fatigue from now on. However, testing is important, and you might think that my next 3 slides are obvious. In that case, it's fine. But since there is this gap between people that think that tests are useful, but they don't actually write tests, it's always good to iterate again on this. Tests are great for catching bugs before they hit production. So if you write a feature and you cover it by tests, you can make sure at least it works for one single use case. And if you have a test written for that, then it's easier for you to find out the edge cases. Tests give confidence to you and to your reviewers. So if you submit a pull request and it's baked by test, then your reviewers are going to be more likely to accept it, because that's a guarantee that your code works. And if you are working on a legacy code base and you want to make some changes or add new features, then if the code base is covered by tests, then you don't worry about breaking anything else, because tests are going to tell you. Last but not least, tests can be your documentation. I'm not a fan of documentation at all because it becomes outdated very, very quickly. But if you use tests as your documentation, then you cannot have out-of-dated documentation, because if you update the code without updating the test, they're going to fail. It's also important to say that the way engineers are approaching to testing is evolving, is changing over time. And here are a few examples. Dan Abramov is a Facebook engineer as well. He's working on React. And he says, unpopular opinion, component unit testing is overrated. And I was a little bit disappointed when I've seen this, because I used to do done-driven development for a long time. But I'm really into testing. So I said, oh, wait, what are you saying? But I get his point. He says components should be very simple. They change very often. And there are better ways to test them. And then we will see one later. Guglielmo Roach from jsday, he is doing super cool stuff with JavaScript. He says, write tests, not too many, mostly integration. So again, unit testing is losing its appeal year after year. In fact, if we go back to 2009, the testing pyramid was saying you unit test all of your code because it's cheap, Then you test a few services because tests are more effective, but obviously more expensive to run. And then you do a few UI tests. Dmitry Abramov last year proposed a new testing pyramid, which says you cover all of your code base with static analysis. For example, with Flow, you can make sure your functions receive the right parameters. And with the ESLint, you can make sure you don't access undefined variables. Then you write a few JavaScript tests. You don't care about the definition of the test, like its unit, its integration, doesn't matter. What matters is the value that tests provide to your application. And you're not going to get rid of WebDriver tests, unfortunately. And one tool that I believe is giving the right answer to these problems and is trying to making tests painless is Jest. And it's my favorite right now, and I'm going to tell you why. It's a zero configuration platform, so you install it, you run it. For most of the use case, you don't need any configuration file at all. It's fast because it runs tests in parallel, and but tests are sandboxed, so they don't leak the state to each other. It gives you an instant feedback, which is great. If you run just in the watch mode, it keeps on listening to file changes, and it is smart enough to understand which tests are affected by the changes you made. And it also runs the last failed test first. So if you have 1,000 green tests and then one is red, the second time you run it, it's going to run the failing test first. So you can make sure you don't waste your time. And this, in conjunction with the bail option that stops Jest as soon as one test fails, gives you the fastest feedback loop. It has built-in coverage report, powerful mocking library. It's actually a complete product. If you compare it with Mocha, for example, with Mocha you have to install expect for Chai for the expectation, Xenon for stubs and mocks, Instabull for code coverage, JSDOM, and not only you have to install these packages, which is fine, you have to keep them updated, which is painful. But if you were asking one single reason why I love Jest and why you should use Jest, is because of snapshot testing. This is my favorite feature. And the way snapshot testing works is that the first time you run a snapshot test, Jest takes a picture of the value that you pass to it. And it's not actually a picture, it writes something on a test file, but picture is a good example of that. Then you change your code, you add new features, you modify your function. You run Jest again, just takes a second picture, and it compares the two, and it can tell you what changed. It doesn't tell you if you did something right or wrong, that's up to you. It just tells you, hey, this output is changed. And here we're going to see an example. We have this function, getUser. It's super simple. It returns an object, a static object. You may think about like a dynamic function which accepts some parameters, and obviously it returns the object according to the parameter, but this is fine for this example. And this user object represents, for example, a GitHub user with a login name, organizations, and repos. How would you test it? What I usually do, like before snapshot testing, I would console log the output of this function, and then I would copy the output, and then I would put it in my test, something like this. How many of you did this before? Cool. That's yeah. We are all guilty of this. And the problem, I mean, it works, but there are two problems mainly. Every time the function changes the output, you have to console log this thing again. And you don't even check what changed. You just copy again, you paste it in the test. Great, done. The second problem is that if one property changes, this expectation cannot tell you exactly what changed. It just tells you, hey, these two objects are different, but it doesn't tell you, for example, the name is changed. Another way to do it, to get a little bit more information out of the test, is doing this, so checking property by property, and which is fine, but obviously it doesn't scale very well, because if you have like 1,000 properties, then you have to write 1,000 expectations. And here is where snapshot testing comes to rescue. And in fact, like the test is way smaller now. And when you run it for the first time, it's going to write a text file that looks like this. It basically serializes the object in a human readable way, so which is useful for code reviews, for example. And if, for example, if you now remove the login property from so the function doesn't returns an object without the login property, then Jest is going to tell you, hey, I was expecting the login property then. And it just doesn't tell you you did something wrong. It's just, hey, if you did it by mistake, you can go back and fix the issue. Otherwise, if you run just in watch mode, you just press U and just updates the snapshot for you. So for me, this is the best developer experience. You run just for the first time, it takes a snapshot. You change your code, just tells you what changed. You either go and fix it or update your snapshot. That is it. And when I talk to people about snapshot testing, there are usually some common questions that come out, and I wanted to give you the answer right now. So as soon as my talk is finished, you can migrate to Jest without any problem. First of all, should I commit my snapshot? Of course you should. That's the whole point. If you don't commit your snapshot, they don't give you any value. Because if you change your code again in the future, you want to know what changed from the previous version. Does it work with code coverage? Yes, super simple. As it's just a different matcher that writes something into a text file. But this is the problem. Does it work with test? How do I do test-driven development with snapshot testing? I mean, in theory, you could write your snapshot by hand, but it doesn't make any sense because that's not the value that Jest provides to you. Just want to tell you what changed. It doesn't give you a way to write better, to design your code in a better way. So it doesn't. The second reason why I love Jest is because you can easily extend it to better fit your application and your need. And one way to extend it is to create your custom serializer. And we will see an example. If someone here know about style components, I created a serializer to serialize style components with Jest. So you not only have the component in the snapshot, but also the CSS. So you can see what changed in your CSS. That's a good example, but we are going to see a most simple one, so you can realize how simple it is to write your own serializer. So we go back to the snapshot, and it's pretty noisy. There are a lot of things. This is a simple object, but obviously, if you think about like having a UI object with nested properties, and maybe you only care about the first level, like login and name, and you want to know that you're going to receive 2 organizations and 2 repo, but you don't care about the content of the property. So, for example, you want to remove them from the snapshot. This is the code to remove them from the snapshot. So you extend expect, adding a new snapshot serializer. A serializer has 2 functions: test, which tells just if the serializer has to be used for the current value, and print, which actually can return the current value so it's transparent, or it can actually do something with the current value. What we want to do now is that when we are serializing an array, instead of returning the actual array, we're going to return the string array and the length of the array between parentheses. And if we run Jest again, our snapshot is going to look like this, which is less noisy, but it can still give us a lot of information. For example, if this function returns now only 1 organization instead of 2, Just can tell us because the number of the line is changed. And now you see how easy it is to write your own serializer. So next thing to do, follow FBJest, start Jest on GitHub and on Facebook, and run a code mod. What is a code mod? A code mod is actually a tool that takes your source code, it transforms it into an abstract syntax tree, and it applies all the transformation from, for example, from Mocha, from Ava, from Jasmine to Jest. So you don't have to do anything to migrate. It works. If you didn't do anything weird, it works very well. Cool. So we have seen how Jest makes tests less painful, and so we are done. Why should we have the right tool? Everyone is going to write tests from now on. But I wanted to go a little bit further because I said I want to find like a better way to write tests. I want to make developers happy when they write tests. So I came to a conclusion. The best testing strategy is not writing tests at all. And this needs to be explained. Because it could look like this. If you can't have failing tests if you don't. But I mean, this is true, but this is not what I mean. I mean not writing tests. I mean not writing tests, but having your code base covered by tests. And we will see a couple of examples. I'm not sure why. Okay. The first example is SnapGuidist. And I started from a very, very simple point. This is a style guide. And if you don't have one, you should. The style guide is a great way to share a component library with your colleagues, designers, developers. And for example, in your style guide, you want to render your components in the different states that they can have. For example, this is a button, and you have button primary, button secondary, button disabled. If you had to test these three components, you would do something like this. You would write a test for the primary, a test for the secondary, a test for the disabled. And when you do the same thing twice, you're doing something wrong. There should be a better way of doing it. To create my style guide, I use React Style Guide. I mean, the concept, it works for any other use case. In this case, I'm using React Style Guides, which actually it's a way to magically generate a style guide out of React components. And what I build is Snap Guides, which is a tool that adds snapshot testing to React Style Guides, and we'll see how it works. I built it with Matteo, which is in the other room. And let's see a demo. Oh, this is the other demo. So this is a style guide generated with React Style Guides. So you have your component in the different states. So basic button, big button. You can even have a counter button, like it's a style guide that you can actually use. And there is this component, this placeholder component, which takes one of animal, beacon, beard, and it returns the picture according to the type that you pass to it. You don't have to know React to understand this. You have this placeholder, you pass a type to it. If you change and you can see a green line there. The green line means that Jest took a snapshot, and the snapshot is actually matching the code that we have in the style guide right now. If we change the code in the style guide from beard to bear, we should see a bear, but I'm not connecting to internet, I guess. And the line becomes red, because now the snapshot doesn't match the component in the style guide. You can even expand it and see what changed. If you are happy with the changes, you update it, it's green again. And I didn't write any test, but Snap Guides wrote the test for me. That's what I think. That's what I mean when I say you should not write it test. Like the browsers or like your node environments, your laptop should write the test for you. That's the point. And this actually generates a real snapshot that you can commit with your changes. The second tool I built is called React Fixit. And again, I started from a simple point. When a user tells you that there is a bug in your application, then what you do, you go in production, you try to reproduce the error in the browser. If you're lucky enough to reproduce the error, then you collect all the information, like the component that failed, the function that failed, the stack trace, everything. Then you go back in your test environment and you try to reproduce the error in your test. And when you have a failing test, finally, you fix the bug and you celebrate. But again, we are doing the same thing twice. And who has all the information that we need to actually write the test? The browser. So why don't the browser write the test for us? So I'm going to show you an example. There is this application which has a bomb, and when I click the bomb, the application explodes. It throws an error. But since there is a React Fixit listening to the error, we will see that the browser is going to give us more useful information than just the stack trace. I click, it throws an error, it throws a poo emoji, but also it throws a test snippet just for us. Thanks, Chrome. We copy the test. Let's see. We have now we have a green test in this application, so we are not covering the case when it explodes. We just copy the test snippet into our test file. Magically, we have a failing test for that. So we are reproducing the issue without writing any test. This is cool, right? And if we fix the issue, and I usually fix my issue deleting the code, that usually works with me. Always. And we now, the test is passing, and we didn't write any test. We have a test to commit. That's cool, mega win. Okay. Quick recap. Find the painless way to write tests. So if you think that writing tests is painful, then you are writing the test in the wrong way. You should find the right way for you. And Jest is one of the tools that can make your life easier. Write more tests, obviously. That's the whole point of this talk. And have fun, because writing tests should be fun. And if you cover your application with tests, then you can deploy at 5 p.m. on a Friday and enjoy your weekend, which is awesome. A couple of more things. This is my joined in a link. Please give me a feedback. Second thing, just as 9,900 stars on GitHub, if you all can give a star to it, we can reach 10K stars and celebrate at the Spritz time later all together. Any questions? That's it. Oh, yeah, thank you.